We just got some groundbreaking, brand new leaks and rumors concerning the Mac Pro coming at WWDC. And as you know, if you've been following this channel, I have been making a couple of videos talking about this year's Mac Pro and how Apple can make a new quad die chip happen. Yes, not 2 dies like in the M1 Ultra, but 4 dies combined together for basically the fastest consumer computer out there right now, destroying NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, all of them, because this chip is gonna be insane. And the reason that both of these videos are called M2 is because of somebody named Hector Martin. Yes, this is his page right here, and he is actually in charge of porting Linux to the Apple Silicon Macs with Asahi Linux, and he is doing such a great job at it. And he told us for a while now that it is totally impossible to make a 4-die chip while using the M1 Max dies. And the reason I believe that that was coming was based on a leak from Mark Gurman last year. As you can see right here in October, he said that the new Mac Pro chip would have either a 2x or 4x M1 Max die configuration. So the 2x is actually the M1 Ultra, and the 4x is supposed to be the M1 Ultra Duo or the M1 Extreme. But unfortunately, Hector Martin replied to my tweets and he said that the IRQ controller in each die can only handle 2 dies. So he basically said that it is impossible. And right here, you could actually see Hector Martin saying that a 4x M1 Max chip, which is what that Bloomberg guy said, who was Mark Gurman, and everybody else has been repeating, is not possible. So he says 4 M1 Max dies together is not possible. But wait a second, because very recently, literally March 30th, he completely flipped the script. And you can see my tweet right here talking about how he does in fact believe that it could be possible. And as you can see, he was actually quote tweeting a leak from Majin Buu showing new Ultra Fusion connections and interposers and a new layout. And check this out. He said, "This is interesting. I still think a 4-die Apple Silicon system is much more likely to use a new die. And if this is really using unmodified M1 Max dies, then it's a really weird retrofit and not symmetrical across the halves." And he goes on to explain that the IRQ controllers in the M1 Max can only handle 2 dies, but he mentions the possibility of Apple using 2 IRQ controllers in 2 of those dies. But the big point I want to make is that Hector Martin was literally the only reason why I believed it would be coming with the M2 Extreme or M2 Ultra Duo, because he said M1 Max dies would not be possible. But now that he changed his mind, everything finally is making sense. For example, Majin Buu's leak showed that there's going to be a new Mac Pro in 2022 coming this September. Yes, this September, and he says that the bridge is going to be connecting 2 M1 Ultra dies together, not M2 Ultra, M1 Ultra dies together. And with that said, there are a lot of other sources who believe the Mac Pro still has to come this year. For example, Mark Gurman back in December said that we should be expecting a revamped Mac Pro with Apple Silicon in 2022. And the craziest thing was, back in January, Mark said that he believes the Apple Silicon transition will be completed by June in WWDC, and he even clarified, he said, "I don't believe the Mac Pro will be released at WWDC, rather announced." So Mark fully believes that the Mac Pro is being announced at WWDC. But it doesn't stop there. We have Leaks Apple Pro, who came out with a product roadmap, and for 2022, he once again mentioned that the Mac Pro is coming alongside a new 27-inch mini LED display with ProMotion tech. And the craziest thing is, he said it's going to be announced at WWDC. But going even further, we have, of course, the source Ross Young, who is extremely accurate in terms of display leaks. He mentioned that the 27-inch mini LED display is coming in June. Yes, in June. So I asked him if it's going to be coming alongside a new Mac Pro, and he said, yes, that is our thinking. And he once again confirmed that it's going to be launching in June with the Mac Pro, and that totally makes sense because if there is a new high-end display launching at WWDC, it absolutely needs to launch alongside a high-end Mac. And this perfectly lines up with Apple's March event when they showed off the Mac Studio, when they mentioned we have one more Mac to release, which is of course the Mac Pro. So revealing it at WWDC would make perfect sense because they would be able to brag that they fully closed out their Apple Silicon transition and shipped or revealed the Mac Pro. However, there is a little problem. When Apple revealed the M1 Ultra chip at the event, they said that there was one last chip going into the M1 processor family, which was, of course, the M1 Ultra. So a lot of people are saying there's no way we're getting an M1 Extreme or anything like that, which means that the Mac Pro is not coming this year. It has to come later because we can't get another chip in the lineup, but we just got some brand new leaks. There is a guy named Bob. He's a news source. He is not that credible, but everything that he's been saying makes sense to me, so take it with a grain of salt, but I actually trust in what he has to say. So on March 31st, he said the chip coming in the new Mac Pro will not be part of the M1 or the M2 family. Yes, that means that Apple is likely to give it a brand new name. So for example, X1 or Z1 or X1 Duo, a brand new family of chips, just like Intel has their regular Core i9s and then they have their Xeons. And the important thing about that is that if you give it a different name like X1, it is kind of separated from the consumer lineup of chips. So if the Mac Pro doesn't get updated for, let's say, 3 to 4 years, it doesn't feel like they're releasing newer M2, M3, M4 chips that are better than the Mac Pro chips because it has a different X1 name, so it's in a different league. So that totally makes sense to me. So if Apple does give it a brand new unique name, that means they were not lying when they said that the M1 Ultra is the last chip in the M1 family, because this one's gonna be brand new. And with that said, Bob actually agreed that introduction this summer is still possible, and he went on to say that the Mac Pro will be at WWDC. But guess what leak he just put out? This one is a little bit shocking to me. He says the M2 chip is not coming at WWDC. But then Bob gave us an even crazier leak that kind of puts everything into perspective and wraps it all up. He says that he knows for sure that after WWDC, the Intel Mac Pro and the Mac Mini Intel model will be gone. Yes, discontinued. Now that is something crazy because I was personally expecting Apple to keep the Intel Mac Pro around maybe for another year as the transition gets wrapped up, just for the people who need things like 1.5 terabytes of RAM or for those high-end AMD cards. But he is saying that they're completely discontinuing the rest of the Intel models, which would basically mean that Apple would completely finish the Apple Silicon transition within the 2-year timeline since the WWDC of 2020, and that would be kind of like bragging rights for Apple. And the craziest thing is that this perfectly matches up to what Mark Gurman said, saying that the transition is going to be wrapped up and completed by WWDC 2022, getting rid of all the Intel chips. So Bob and Mark are on the same page. But now that I've went through all of those sources agreeing that the Mac Pro is coming this year at WWDC, and it's not gonna be based on the M2, it's gonna be based on the M1 Max with a new product name, it's time to go through how I personally expect Apple to put the Mac Pro together, including the chassis, the size of it, what's gonna be inside of it, how much RAM, if there's gonna be graphics options. So let's get into that. First of all, Mark Gurman from Bloomberg gave us a new article on March 13th talking about the Mac Pro and how Apple can pull it off. And Mark gave us two possibilities. The simplest explanation is that Apple could roll out a Mac Pro with an M1 Ultra as well as a dual M1 Ultra without giving that higher power chip a new name. So Apple was not lying. The M1 Ultra is the best chip. They're just putting 2 of them into the Mac Pro. So that is one option. And then the second option was for Apple to hold off on the new Mac Pro until the M2 Ultra and dual M2 Ultra are ready. So I think that is not likely based on everything that we discussed in this video. I believe Apple is just going to be giving us the M1 Ultra Duo with potentially a new X1 or whatever name. And in terms of how they would do that, my first idea was for them to stack 2 on top of each other, but that might not be likely because you've got to deal with heat and it makes things a little bit more complicated. So this brings me back to what Hector Martin said about Majin Buu's leak. And here you can see there's 3 Ultra Fusions, and if you see this little image right in the corner, you can see that they're combining 2 M1 Ultras together, which he confirmed, with a new Ultra Fusion going down the middle, somehow combining them, potentially on different layers, combining them together. But the craziest thing is that Majin Buu confirmed that Apple is going to be able to put in a form of Ultra Fusion which can access a separate memory controller along with on-chip controllers to access up to 1 terabyte of memory. Yes, that means that with Apple Silicon, Apple is going to be able to take the Mac Pro chip, the quad die chip, and connect it to external RAM module slots, just like we have on the current Intel Mac Pro. So that's essentially going to solve the issue of not having enough RAM with Apple Silicon. And yes, Majin Buu confirmed that the memory team is working on a solution to fix it because it is slower than the access times of the older Xeon, which basically confirms that it is slot-in memory that they are using, and they're trying to connect it to Apple Silicon, and they're working on it right now. Yes, those are slots. And in terms of the actual graphics situation and how Apple is going to handle that, Hishnash was telling me for a while that he believes that the new Apple Silicon Mac Pro is going to continue to have lots of PCIe slots, and I didn't believe him until right now. Yes, he says the Mac Pro could ship with the M1 Ultra first and then M2 Extreme later, providing a bunch of MPX slots, potentially with Apple's own GPUs or even the old AMD GPUs. Now, in terms of what kind of chassis Apple's gonna use, based on all of this, I think it totally makes sense for Apple to go the easiest and the simplest route. Yes, that means literally taking the Intel Mac Pro and using the same chassis and the same power supply, the same fans, everything, potentially just swapping out the cooler for the CPU with a new copper cooler that's better at cooling, and literally just switching out the motherboard with a new Apple Silicon-based motherboard, just like they did for the M1 Mac Mini, where they just changed up the motherboard, the logic board, with the new M1 chip. I think they're gonna do the same thing, so it's gonna be the same size. On the back, you're gonna have the same memory slots, and I do believe that Apple could actually keep the MPX modules the same. And to me, this makes the most sense because if Apple is trying to make as much profit as possible, it makes sense to continue supporting AMD graphics cards, which for a while now I was in denial. I did not think Apple would do it, but if they want to make as much money as possible in the easiest way, they can continue supporting those AMD cards because they have a really high markup on them, and they can continue selling massive amounts of RAM for extra money. So the people who need a lot of CPU power, they're gonna be buying the really crazy quad die chip, which is gonna be very expensive, like thousands of dollars just for the quad die chip. And then people who need even more GPU power for like 3D rendering can buy those MPX graphics modules. And that means that this new machine is gonna be extremely expensive, basically just as expensive as the old Intel Mac Pro, which could go up to $50,000. It's probably gonna remain around the same with the same profit margins for Apple, which is absolutely insane. So with that said, we have all these leaks and rumors pointing to WWDC for the new Mac Pro, and with Hector Martin saying that the M1 Max quad die is now possible, I think that is the most likely scenario for them to put that out first, and then later this year in the fall, then they can move on to the M2 with the new redesigned MacBook Air. So with that said, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, go ahead and click the circle above to subscribe for more videos like this one. Definitely check out one of those two videos right there, especially the stacked chip one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.